Good afternoon and welcome to VetNet Veteran Network webinar on procurement readiness. My name is Elvis Avdic and I work here at the Institute for Veterans Military Families, and today's webinar is brought to you by IVMF's VetSource program. Before we kick it off to Misty, our host, I would like to just let everybody know on YouTube that if you have questions, make sure you enable your YouTube chat box and type your questions in, and I'll make sure our guest speakers get it. If you don't know how to activate your chat box, just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account or your any other Google account such as Gmail or Google+. For our participants in the sessions, make sure your mic is muted if you're not speaking, so that way we don't have any echoes in the session. So thank you all very much for your participation, and I'm going to kick it off to Misty for introductions.
Yes, thank you, Elvis. So I'll do a quick introduction of the IVMF as well as myself, and then I'll actually hand it over to Eljava and Mark to introduce themselves, as I'm sure they can say more about themselves than I can at times. But as everyone knows, the Institute for Veteran and Military Families has a long history of serving veterans through an entire entrepreneurship portfolio that includes Boost to Business and Entrepreneurship Bootcamp for Veterans, EBV, and Veteran Women Igniting the Spirit of Entrepreneurship, BWISE. To date, we've actually served over 60,000 veterans through those different trainings. But our newest program is the Coalition of Veteran-Owned Businesses, where we're working with Fortune 500 companies who are looking to increase the number of procurement-ready veterans within their supply chains, as well as other large industry leaders. And with that comes our VetSource program that we're hosting here at Hampton Roads next week. But before that, we did want to host kind of a helpful webinar that sort of gives a little bit of tips and tricks for veteran-owned businesses so that they're best ready to take advantage of these opportunities. We do have companies joining us next week in Hampton Roads, including Walmart, First Data, Lockheed, Parmax, Brightview, KKR, Bank of America, and a few others. Actually, more adding all the time. So, we wanted to go kind of over a 30,000-foot view of what you should have ready, what common mistakes are, what resources are out there to help you, and then what we can do as we continue to move forward. But with that, I will hand it over to Eljava to introduce himself, then to Mark, and then I will hand it over, after Mark, I'll hand it over to Cecilia to introduce herself. Thanks, Cecilia, for joining. So with that, Eljava.
Thank you, Misty. As she said, my name is Eljava Abdul Kadir, and I'm the director of the Southside Innovations Center. We're a project of the Whitman School of Management at Syracuse University, and we specialize in working with individuals who are starting into or growing businesses. We're both a business incubator and a business services center in the Syracuse area. One of the things that we focus on big time is working with entrepreneurs who are growing, and that means folks who are certified either through the state certifications with MWBE certifications or SV Service Disabled Veteran Owned Small Business certifications, helping folks, one, fill out the certification, and two, helping folks gain access to to the opportunities that exist, whether that is access to capital in order for folks to start their own to grow their business, or access to networks, or access to markets, which I'll speak about in a little bit. As I mentioned, we are a project of the Whitman School of Management at Syracuse University. So much of our methodologies and our resource bases come from there.
Great, thanks. And Mark, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Mark Votman. I'm one of the co-founders of Guff Tribe. Guff Tribe is a website and a software as a service platform for federal contractors to identify business opportunities, do market research, find teaming partners, manage the BD process through a sales pipeline, and basically to understand how competitive they are. We work a lot with companies of all sizes. We do have kind of a focus recently on veteran-owned businesses as they seem to be a fast-growing small business population, and we work very well with small businesses. Yeah, we focus a lot on just understanding the federal contracting market via the data available.
Thank you. And Cecilia, if you'll take a moment to introduce yourself. You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Sure can.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Cecilia Cotton, and I work for George Mason University, and our program is the Virginia Procurement Technical Assistance Program. The main office is in the MEC Center at George Mason University. Right now, we're located in the Hampton Roads area in an incubator across from NASA Langley, and we specialize in assisting small businesses who are interested in doing business with the federal, state, and local governments. We literally hold their hands through the maze of government processes as far as letting them know what the requirements are for regulation and the requirements for just in general being the best possible business that they can be.
Oh, perfect. So I wanted to start out just with a couple of soft questions, and then obviously open it up for the viewers that are out there to ask some questions. And what we'll do, viewers, is as you have questions, if you type them into your boxes, to your chat boxes, Elvis said, we'll actually start with those, and then we can turn over to live questions if we have time at the end. But, we know that government contracting is a huge opportunity for a lot of veterans, and that the private sector is actually even dwarfs that opportunity. So we know the government spends about $500 billion a year. Through the CVOB, I've done a little bit of calculations, and just through 2 of our companies alone, they spend about $11 billion a year on veteran-owned businesses. But I want to talk to a little bit and ask each of the panelists to kind of chat about, what is the opportunity really out there for veteran-owned businesses, and what can they best do to prepare to take advantage of that? Whether that's understanding everything from certification to what they should prepare document-wise, et cetera. And I know that's a large question that we can kind of unpack and dig into a little bit, but if we kind of start out with, if there's the top 3 things that you would tell a veteran-owned business to get in line first before they kind of tackle the procurement opportunity, what would that be?
Cecilia, you're on mute.
I guess I'm not doing it well. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. The first thing I would let them know to do is that they have to get in touch with Duns & Bradstreet and secure a Duns number. Of course, we hope they have at least an LLC business license prior to doing that, so that they can transfer whatever information they have on that state corporation commission license to Duns & Bradstreet. Then after that, if they want to do business at the federal level, they will need to certify or register rather in the System for Award Management, the SAM system, and also the Dynamic Small Business Search, which can be done through the SAM registration. The Virginia PTAP office, we're a nonprofit, and we assist them in doing that so they don't have to have a headache with the small things. They need to do that first. Veterans who are exclusively interested in doing business with the Veterans Department must be certified. It doesn't make any difference whether they're disabled or not, but they want to be certified. We have 4 counselors in the Hampton Roads area, but the VA online has a list of certification specialists all across the United States. So there's always somebody to help them. It doesn't matter what location you're in. So if you want to do business exclusively with the VA, you would need that CVE certification. If not, if you want to do business with any agency or any Department of Defense agency, all you need is your DD-214. Sometimes veterans run into problems with prime contractors when they're trying to solicit business as subcontractors, because that prime contractor would like them to have that CVE certification. However, it is not required. Only the DD-214 is required. when you're doing prime or subcontract work outside of the VA. So that's the first thing you need to do. You want to have a capability statement that proves or show who, what, how, when you do what you do, so that when you introduce yourself to contracting people or even other partnering agents, you will be able to show them that you are a viable company, that you have past performance, that your employees are certified, and that everything is on an up and up. So those are the first things that we suggest, and we always add and find a PTAP office.
I can jump in now, if that's all right. So at Guff Tribe, we focus on probably most of the process following everything Cecilia just talked about. So definitely you want to be registered in SAM.gov. Definitely you want to make sure that you have your certifications in order based on the way that you want to bid. If you are hoping to leverage the government's tendency to prioritize set-aside contracting, particularly service-disabled veteran-owned business set-asides, then yes, you got to make sure that you have your proper paperwork in order to indicate that you have that designation. Separately from that, though, what a lot of companies miss in this process is making sure that the government is buying what you sell in enough volume, and that the market for that product or service is competitive enough for new entrants to break in, and also, that you're not limiting yourself to a specific agency market based on your preconception of what the market looks like. So you may come in thinking, I'm a veteran providing XYZ service, so I'm going to go try to work for Veterans Affairs. But there are ways to look. There's, this is exactly what Guff Tribe is intended to help with, to identify who the buyers are in the government for what you sell, who your competitors are, in what way the government contracts for that. Do they use the set-asides that you want to leverage? Are there existing contracting vehicles that you are going to need to be aware of in order to break into a market segment? Does it even make sense to try to break in as a prime contractor, or should you try to start building relationships with companies that are already successful in the market and try to operate as a subcontractor? Those are lots of questions, and the baseline for answering those is understanding what the market currently looks like with a tool like Guff Tribe, or with public data, which is what we use, or a similar service.
Thank you. What I'd like to add to what has already been said is, because I'm not certain exactly who's listening in, I think that when anybody is looking at doing business with the government, or doing business with anyone for that matter, it's important to make sure you clearly identify what product or service you're really providing, and making sure that you're deciding where the actual margin is, like what space do you operate in. And plenty of times folks who who after they have their business set up and they're providing their product or service, as businesses not coming in, they start to look at, all right, let me go ahead and get the certification in order to increase my sales. Well, getting the certification isn't the magic bullet. You've got to get you've got to make sure that you're certified. And then after that, you've got to make sure that the government agencies that you've got to do the work. I guess the same strategies that you would use to market your business to anyone, you've got to make sure that you're marketing to the proper government agencies. And so both Gwen and Mark hit the nail on the head with respect to making sure that you're certified, making sure that that you have a capability statement. The other thing that I think is important to mention is making sure that you can really do the work. Like when you do government contracting, know what the payment time is. Like you're gonna get paid in 2 months, a minimum of 60 days if you're doing business with the government. Making sure that you can carry your inventory, or carry your staff, or carry the production of your work for the time period before you get paid from the government. I guess that's one thing that I'd add to this.
Hey, Misty, can I respond to a comment that came in? So somebody commented that without past performance, no agency will let a small business prime. It's just too risky. I totally understand where you're coming from with that. That's something we hear all the time, and it's certainly difficult to break in to the industry as a small business without some past performance as a subcontractor. So starting with a subcontractor, it shouldn't be considered a negative. A lot of companies make, their entire government contracting business on top of subcontracting. In some ways, it's far easier, particularly if you're able to productize what you do and sell through as an expense item as opposed to as official subcontractor. It can be extremely lucrative. However, governments award to first-time contractors all the time. In fact, over the last couple of fiscal years, the number of first-time awardees in the government, small businesses, has exploded. It was a particular priority for the previous administration, and so far with this administration, that does not seem to be changing. It of course remains to be seen what sort of FY18 budget comes through and what that means for spending priorities. But particularly for the SDV OSB set aside, that's going to continue to be a priority for the government for a long time. So I would not immediately discount it as an impossibility if you're just getting started.
Another question came through. It said, I guess, is it at all realistic to win something that has gone to bid? And so the way that I'd address that question is making sure that your project management is on point. So knowing exactly when where to find contract opportunities, when to go to pre-bid meetings, for example, having relationships with those primary contractors, which kind of talks a little bit about that previous question as well. Recognizing exactly who your customer is. Sometimes your customer may be the government agency, but really sometimes your customer is that primary contractor, and you're going and bidding, and if you're starting off, sometimes it's okay to go ahead and formalize those relationships with the primary contractors, so that you can get some wind under your wings. And so there we go.
If the same commenter had some follow-up questions, and is it all right if I just continue to answer these, Misty? Okay. So the follow-up question was the question about, is it realistic to win something that's gone to bid, in particular dealing with these long lead times for contract awards, sometimes more than a year. There's a couple ways to answer this question. So first of all, yes, like the two big questions here are, is it too late if the RFP is already out to be in contention for something? And that's a question that we hear all the time. And sometimes, yes, it is. Sometimes it's not. Just depends on what type of bid it is. So without knowing more about your business, it's hard to answer that specifically. You certainly shouldn't give up on something just because it's already out in the RFP stage, because even just getting practice writing proposals is very useful experience. But focusing on RFIs and sources soughts, absolutely. A big thing, though, for veteran-owned businesses, particularly if you're trying to leverage that set aside, is understanding which offices are contracting for things. If they're using SDV OSB sole source, if they're doing things limited competition for SDV OSB set asides, a lot of times before the RFP goes out, they will have pre-screened the companies that they want to bid on them and give them a heads up that something's coming, with maybe a little teaser that doesn't go out publicly. So building relationships with the contracting officers that habitually put out the types of things you bid on is a common practice as well. And that's another thing you can do through a service like ours or similar services, or even with the public data, although it's harder with the public data. The other question of how to deal with these long lead times, Guff Tribe, when we founded it in 2013, we didn't make revenue for a year and a half. It was, you have to invest in your business. You have to be willing to invest in whatever way makes sense for that industry. For software, that means building the underlying software. For government contracting, it means investing the time and resources and effort to build up a pipeline that starts paying dividends a year, 18 months, 24 months into the future, and then maintaining that. So you get a constant churn of those opportunities once you get past that first horizon. And in the meantime, building those subcontract relationships for maybe some quick wins, some quick revenue is important. There's other things I could say on this, but I don't want to monopolize.
Yeah, that question right there, that last piece that you were talking about in terms of the lead time. If as the question states, if the company is focused on on government contracting, it's difficult to only depend on government contracting. Like, so you've got to make sure that you diversify what you offer, just to make sure that if for example you're doing a construction project and you're only focusing on government contracting, well, you're gonna have a couple of months where you bought materials and you're performing work and you've got employees working on a project that that you just don't have the funds for, unless you had a nest egg that will allow you to operate in that way. Otherwise, like winning bids that are not or doing jobs that are not 100% or are not all government contracting would provide you sometimes with funds that you need. There are also, I guess in New York State anyways, there is the Bridge to Success loan, for example, or there are other opportunities that will provide you with the funds that you need in order to carry your project after you've won a bid. You can apply to the Bridge to Success loan program, which is geared towards folks who have certifications in New York State, specifically for MWBE firms, but for veteran-owned firms, I'm sure we'd be able to look into what opportunities exist in your states.
So let's unpack that a little bit. I know that we mentioned a little bit about going in as if you're not ready to go in as a prime, go in as a tier 2. And then also you started going into a little bit about financing. I know that, even on the private side, some of these companies, if you take La Quinta and in Suites, the hotel brand, they've actually made a pledge that they will pay any veteran-owned business within 15 days of services. First Data, which is probably one of the largest companies you've never heard of, but they, anytime you swipe your card, 80% of the time, that's First Data processing that transaction, has said that they will pay any veteran-owned business within 30 days of services rendered. So there are different financing options, whether that's through financing or banks or loans, as well as starting small and growing your businesses through tier 2. So can we kind of unpack that a little bit? I know, Aljava, you talked a little bit about New York programs, but is there anything even on the national level for some of these other veteran-owned businesses that they can look into?
I can comment on that. So there's a couple of things. So yes, there are. So the SBA has specific small business loan programs. The application process for that can be a bit time-consuming. So it might not be something you can count on, day one or month one, but certainly beginning that process, that is going to be your lowest risk, lowest interest option for a small business loan. And veteran-owned businesses are always a priority for the SBA. So it certainly is something you should look into. If you just go to the SBA website or Google that, you should be able to find that pretty easily. And then, of course, how to start as a small business, especially if you're doing a services intensive business model and you have to hire staff, and the government typically has net 30, net 45 payment terms. There are these few exceptions, I think, that Misty was just talking about for entities that promise to pay sooner. But you typically need to have some sort of a financing option. And there are services out there that do that. I'm actually at the offices of Street Shares right now. You can see the banner back there because we just did an event with them this morning. They're a partner of ours. They do invoice factoring, which can be getting an advance on invoices that the government, after you invoice the government's continued to be considered to be a good debtor. It's pretty easy to finance those and get an advance on invoices to pay staff. That sort of financing, is very common and can sort of help you build up a cash flow reserve in the short term, so you eventually don't need any financing at all. Was that getting at what you wanted to, Misty?
I can actually add to that if it would be useful. The one program I was talking about for New York State was like I said, was specifically for individuals who had already won a contract but do not have the funds in order to carry the contract until they get paid, right? And so so New York State has that specific program, but there are other like across the country, banks and financial institutions that provide what they call contract financing. And the contract financing is essentially, you've won a contract and you basically have a promise from a reputable agency, in this case the government, and you needed that working capital or those funds that are necessary to carry you until the invoice is paid, right? And so I wouldn't make any one suggestion of a financial institution, but I would look for contract financing. You can also look into like Patriot Express, or Patriot, basically lines of credit that exist in different areas of the country. And so I'm not sure if someone else has more experience with that, but I've had a couple of veteran clients who looked into that as an option, and it worked for them. Misty, we can't hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you all. And Cecilia, I didn't know if you want to jump in on that at all, but I see on the side there, Patrick Kelly says, there's been a contract, and this is a good question, past performance, right? So Aljava, you touched on it earlier that, it's great to have other things other than just government contracts, not only for the finance needs, but also for performance and past performance. When leveraging past performance, a contract with FEMA in this case, how do veterans not only best do that when going for certain contracts, but how do you best convey that when filling out profiles, whether it be, on the government side, but also in things like AREBA for the other groups? Basically, how do you best display that?
Yeah, I mean, it was mentioned earlier, I think when Gwen was talking, that it's important to make sure that you have a nice capability statement. A lot of times when there'll be networking opportunities or even at pre-bid meetings or or conferences where government contracting opportunities would be talked about, where you've got to make sure that when you have an opportunity to provide a purchasing director or the one who's going to be making the decision about doing work with your business, making sure that you have a capability statement that would include your experience, your expertise, your certifications. It's kind of a snapshot of a resume. I'd say 3x5 card. Both sides maybe, or a one-pager that you can send out to agencies to just let them know, hey, look, this is me. This is what I can do. This is what I've been doing. Because it gives people an idea of, oh, wow, like, all right, they've been doing the $3 to $5 million jobs, so I feel comfortable working with them. Or, oh, okay, they're used to operating in the $500,000 sphere, so I can do that type of work with them. And so leveraging previous work would come across best in your capability statements.
Yeah, just to follow up on that. So I agree with everything that was just said. I would also, I think, further just state that there's no formula. There's no like guaranteed, tried and true way to spin one contract into a sustainable revenue stream. It's a grind. Government contracting is a grind. Not everyone succeeds in it. It's a difficult business. The people who are willing to push through and grind through it are the ones who are successful. Depending on the type of contract you have with FEMA, there are different ways you might want to go about trying to get additional work. Right now, FEMA is likely to be an agency that gets a good amount of funding for a while, but it's going to be for a very specific kind of work. So if you are someone who does construction work or environmental remediation or stuff like that, that's highly relevant to the physical work of disaster recovery, talking to your contracting officer about what opportunities there are to leverage your set aside, presuming that you're veteran-owned business. There's a lot of sole source award happening right now because FEMA can't afford to wait to go through a traditional procurement process for disaster recovery efforts. So this is still a business that does, to some extent, rely a lot on networking. And that networking begins with the actual person who writes the contracts and oversees the contracts. So the person you're familiar with through your existing contract. Separately from that, I would say to look for similar types of work at other agencies and leverage the functional work that you do on similar opportunities elsewhere, and build a pipeline that is, make sure you have a pipeline in process that is not myopically focused on one specific agency market. So if you do environmental remediation and construction, look at Army Corps of Engineers, look at USDA, look at, the Forestry Service does a lot of environmental remediation work. The Army in general does a lot of environmental remediation. So, and that's very easy to do, again, using a service like ours to understand what the type of contract you are doing for FEMA, where does that exist elsewhere in the government, and how is that funded?
I'd like to add something pertaining to past performance as well. A lot of businesses think that they have to have past performance as far as the federal government is concerned, but the past performance is any contracting activity, any successful contracting activity and experience that you can bring to the table. Sometimes when you're trying to get a prime, for example, to legitimize the work that you've done for them, you're waiting for them to do that letter of certification, so to speak. We advise clients that if you can put something together yourself and just have that very busy prime contractor sign on the dotted line, that's sufficient, whether it's commercial contracting or whatever, as long as you are keeping a record of your experience so that can be presented to the government when you're going after a particular award. Also, currently, because of the disasters, the hurricane disasters happening right now, the DLA just sent out a letter to show that, as we know, companies have to be registered in SAM, but SAM requires the cage code and other things. And what they're doing is waiving the cage code system itself, but allowing a shortcut to circumvent, so that contractors can, if they want to work for FEMA or whatever disaster kind of opportunity, that they will be able to go and get that contract. I spoke to someone yesterday and I advised them not to go to Florida because a friend would like to come and do some work for them. They want to make sure they're registered in FEMA or the like, to ensure that if they went for a particular contract, that they would get paid.
I've got one more thing to add, I guess, to this whole piece of making sure that you are representing yourself and including your past performance. You've got to obviously make sure that you have your NAICS codes down, right? Your North American Industry Classification Code. Make sure that folks know, what type of work that you're able to do, what industry you're in, and usually when you're not only with not particularly with self-certified stuff, but with things that with agencies, if you're getting certified through an agency that does have a process of making sure that you meet the criteria, sometimes they're going to look at your tax returns to make sure that you've operated in the area that you're requesting the NAICS code in. We've kind of heavily focused on in the conversation so far. We've kind of heavily focused on construction and the construction industry, but but the government also hires folks who do a whole lot of other things, like providing uniforms, or doing promotional materials, or other skills and services that that you might be an expert at. And so I think it's also important to remember, or to at least touch on the fact that yes, construction work is heavy, and probably the higher higher dollar amounts. But there are a lot of other industries that you could utilize your veteran certification for as well, which you might not see those opportunities posted or promoted in in the search tools where you're looking for government contracting. Maybe they're discretionary funds, or maybe they fall below the threshold of having to go out for an RFP. So you have an opportunity for single source work with respect to that as well.
That's a really great point. And I'll admit that I think it was a little bit of a cheat on my part to talk about construction and some of the hard services, because it's just much easier. Those are easier contracts that come out more often. The procurement process is typically straightforward. It's typically LPTA, lowest price technically acceptable, which means if you can get your bid in, you can prove that you can do it, and you're the cheapest, you're going to win. Like, that's pretty straightforward, and it's easier to do sole source or set aside type work in those sorts of NAICS codes. But you're right, a lot of veteran companies want to start businesses for, sort of consultancy services or management services, because they have some sort of very specific subject matter expertise, that they came out of the military with some expertise in cybersecurity or some specific IT system or something like that. And that it is harder to break in as a prime for a services company, for sure, because there's very few publicly competed procurement processes for services for a company of one person or 5 people or 3 people. It's much more likely that you'll end up with a 3-year contract for services that assumes you're going to have 10, 15, 20 FTE or something like that, full-time equivalents, or the number of staff. For those types of contracts, in my experience talking to vets, you have much more success starting as a subcontractor. Look to companies that have existing long-term consultancy contracts providing a certain type of service to which your subject matter expertise is complementary, and start building those relationships with those primes. Or to the extent you can productize what you do as a training course or as a piece of knowledge like a piece of knowledge content, something like that you can sell through to a company that has an existing contract. It's very easier for companies with existing contracts with money to burn, frankly, to bring on expertise to prove that they are still providing relevant services to their client. And that can be a good way to break in, get that past performance, so that you can then start winning prime contracts and building your own staff.
I don't know if I mentioned it before, but the PTAP is nonprofit. So when we gain new clients, we call them in and we have one-on-one counseling, and we go through the scenario of the NAICS code in determination of what they do or what they'd like to do. And as someone said, the government has services and supply from soup to nuts. It's the whole gamut. But we make sure that they have all the NAICS codes, and we assist them in determining their primary NAICS codes, and then that helps us to see what should go next. And we do advise that they do subcontracting, concentrate on subcontracting, even though sometimes they come and they want that $1 million contract. They don't have any past performance. So we hold their hands. We make sure that they understand that it's a process, and everybody is, even if we have to do the hard line, everybody is not equipped to do business at the federal government level. So whatever we have to do, that's what we do.
I see a question on here about the self-certification and what's the quickest, cheapest way, I guess, to become officially service disabled veteran-owned small business. If I could just mention, there are technical assistance programs all over the place, all over the country, and so some of these programs are geared towards assisting small businesses start up and grow. Gwen mentions hers, and there's in New York State, many of the SBDCs. From my agency, we have an entrepreneurial assistance program, which is a New York State funded EAP program. There are the PTAC centers, which is the Procurement and Technical Assistance Centers. So there are a lot of the SBDCs and the SBAs, there are a lot of agencies that are geared towards assisting startup businesses with all over the country, and so I would I guess begin by looking at what region or what state you live in, and then trying to find out whether or not there are technical assistance providers that can assist with helping to do that veteran service disabled veteran-owned small business.
That is correct. I'm one of the CVE certification counselors. We have 4 of them in the Hampton Roads area. But if you go to the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs website, you will see a list of all of them in the general, whatever state you're in.
And before we jump, I see that there's a question from Broken Gear as well. Certification is actually something to kind of dig into a little bit and see out. So, many companies, in the government, there's obviously requirements around certification. On the private side, many companies accept to self-certify, but also will accept the CVE. And there's other ones that are now emerging, whether it's NAVOBAs or NDBDCs or other groups too. When it comes to certification, though, it's often tricky for small businesses to know, are they really ready to do the certification? What do they need to have in order? Is there a certain revenue level? And does that really kind of help open the door, or is it more of a marketing opportunity once they're certified? If anyone can speak to basically any of that, when is it time to get certified? What do we talked a little bit about when what you need to have ready, but also on the private side, knowing what certification might be good for you in terms of opening doors or using it as a marketing tool.
I'll answer. Many times certification is and when the right time is to get certified is dependent on the certification itself. And so the certification might say you've got to be in business for 1 year, you've got to be 51% owned and operated by a veteran, you have to be, they have eligibility requirements for the certifications. And once you find out what those eligibility requirements are, then you'll know whether or not you can even apply for them. But when should you apply for them is another important question. And so I'll take, for example, in a different sphere, there are certifications that you might get that are time bound. You can only utilize that certification, for 8 years, for example, and you can only, after those 8 years, you can no longer be certified. So knowing when the right time is to be certified will be dependent upon which certification it is. Another very important, I guess, thing to consider is, I guess, looking at what your customers want. So sometimes the customer might it's fine that you have a certification, but if you don't have this certification, it doesn't really count. You know what I mean? So it'll depend on if you're doing contracting. It'll depend on what that original the agency that's paying you to do it. It depends on what they're looking for. So in the case of service disabled veteran-owned small business, if New York State, for example, is saying yes, we would, we expect you to be, certified through New York State, then you've got to be certified through New York State, right? And it doesn't matter that there's another certification out there, right? And so on and so forth. And so just find out. And then the other question that you asked was, does it open the door for you, or is it really just a marketing tool? I mean, that's an important question because sometimes, it's just letting people know that if you care, we've provided service to us in our country. You know, when people say, thank you for your service. Well, I'm just letting you know that I am someone who provided the service. So having that veteran-owned small business certification listed on your business card or somewhere out there is important to people who it matters to, right? But at the same time, it's so important to make sure that that you don't just look at it like that magic bullet, like I was saying earlier. Having the certification does not ever guarantee a job. You still, you may be in competition with another certified small veteran-owned small business that is in the same industry as you are in and can do the same work, right? And so it becomes important to know that the door now is now open, but you still have to win the job.
Thank you. To answer some questions down the side, so the event in Norfolk is not only for local folks. It's an event that will be traveling, so we'll be hosting these 3 times throughout the year. This one, like I said, is hosted by Walmart, so they'll have a contingent of folks out there. So for the person looking at mass retail purchasing, it would be a good one in Norfolk considering the host. But for Los Angeles, I know it's last minute to fly across the country, but we will be hosting an event upcoming in Austin in first quarter of next year, and then looking at other locations across the country as we go on. So these events are for folks not only from but nationwide and as well as locally. So, and yes, we can gather, Beverly, an email together with a lot of the resources that were mentioned. So if you'll give me some time, we have the event early next week, but what we can do is I can gather together, pass around the speakers, make sure that, if they have anything to add, we can make a hit list and send it out to the folks that registered for this event. But does that answer your questions in terms of those who are traveling to Norfolk? So yes, it's for everyone. It's a nationwide, but it will be hosted a couple times throughout the year next year in other places, but this one would be a great one. Yes, Walmart is sponsoring this. So Walmart is bringing out their team for this event. This is the first one hosted by the CVOB, so Walmart is the title sponsor for this one, and they will be there. They'll be on the panel, and they'll be there with their procurement representatives. So I think we've answered all the questions down the side for now. So common mistakes. So, a lot of times we go into these marketing and these networking events happen a lot throughout the country, whether it's for different industries or different regions or different buying. So what should veterans really have prepared when going into these networking opportunities, and what really should, level set expectations? What should they be setting as a goal to accomplish at these events, and how do they kind of make the most of that opportunity and turn it into a successful engagement?
If they're going into a networking event and they get the opportunity to speak to a contracting officer, they want to make sure they have that capability statement. They want to make sure they have their DD 214. And if they've been CVE certified, they want to make sure that they have that. That would involve knowing what your NAICS code is and all of that, because that will be on those documents. And that contracting specialist or contracting officer will be able to probably check their SAM status right on the spot and assist them with anything that might be missing. Hopefully they've done everything else so that they can get to that level of availability as far as contracting is concerned, or even subcontracting. And also want to mention something about the subcontracting piece. If a large business is searching for subcontractors, they have that subcontract plan that they have to ensure is completed. So they're looking for veterans and other socioeconomic classified businesses, and you have to be able to verify that certainly you have whatever certification is required at that time. So if you have those first 3 documents that I mentioned, then that's part way of getting your before the person, not your foot in the door, but certainly an audience.
I'll jump in on this. I don't have a ton to say about networking events. I personally don't care for networking events. I'm a strong believer that, you know, your bid is the most important thing, especially in this highly price competitive environment. However, I mean, there's a ton that's done as set aside or sole source that never goes public. So having a relationship with contracting officers, as I said, is very important. So to the extent that that you can get to networking events that have contracting officers, building those relationships is very important. Most important, though, is to go into those things prepared and to know, you know, what the contracting office is producing and how that interests you, so you can ask specific questions. Beyond just having a capability statement, but being able to say, I'm aware that this is a funding priority for your office for the next fiscal year. I have this set aside. This is my passport. You know, come in prepared with specific suggestions as to how the government contractor can achieve their office's funding priorities with you, with your assistance. Because that's how a lot of this happens. It's not always driven by the contracting office or the program office. It's often driven by suggestions made by private industry. So coming in with good suggestions that show that you understand the funding priorities and the contracting mechanisms is very important. And to the point Cecilia made about interacting with large companies, the same sort of thing. If you go to these networking events that are basically speed dating opportunities for these large contractors to meet a bunch of potential smalls they can partner with, to stand out from that, like, come in prepared with specific opportunities that you know you want to be a part of, explain how you want to be a part of that, what you can provide, maybe even some sample proposal content that you think would help make the proposal stand out. You know, things that if you walk in and just blindly saying to, you know, Lockheed Martin that you think you'd be a good partner for them with no specifics in mind, you're going to be forgotten the minute you walk away from the table. So looking, you know, knowing in advance which companies you really want to talk to and what you specifically want to say to them and offer to them about which specific opportunities is what really tends to stick in the minds of a larger contractor. I did want to make one comment about Broken Gear's comment about success in commercial markets. Is it all right if I quickly talk about that? So this is a really great question because it touches on something that we haven't gotten to yet, which is the way the government tends to buy products. And especially with things like gear and clothing and stuff, specifically for the armed forces, which is what I assume this is for. A lot of that is done, first of all, on an LPTA basis, lowest price technically acceptable, which means as long as it technically meets the requirements, the government has to accept the lowest cost bid. And a lot of that is executed through federal supply schedules, which are these large contracting vehicles managed by the General Services Administration, and only pre-certified companies who hold schedule contracts can bid on those. So that's a whole series of problems for companies who are who've built their business around the profit margins for commercial, because profit margins are going to be much lower for the government. So you expect to make lower margin on products if you're going to be selling to the government. And also that it's going to take a while possibly to get onto the contracting vehicles that are going to allow you to bid at all. One thing you might want to look into are these product aggregators. There's a company out there called Atlantic Diving Company, which aggregates a lot of gear and clothing for the military. And they hold every contracting schedule. They can sell through. Of course, they take a cut, which is going to eat into your margins more. But if you don't have to then internally build up the capacity to pursue these contracts, which costs you money, maybe you can accept a lower margin and allow someone else to do all the work for you of attaining the contracts. So just a couple of thoughts there.
I'd like to go back to the question about the networking events. Although I would agree that not all of them are useful. If you're going to go to a networking event, and I would strongly suggest at least going to one. If you're going to go to one, make sure that you're intentional about what you're leaving with and what you plan on leaving with, rather. And I would plan on leaving with the name, at least, and maybe having had an interaction with the decision maker, right? And so maybe you're going to meet other larger contractors who win the job and would subcontract to you. Well, who is the decision maker at that company that I need to get my capability statement in front of, that I have to have my meet with face to face, right? If you're going to a networking event that is going to put you in front of the purchasing directors for your county, or the purchasing directors for your state, or the purchasing directors for OGS, or something like that, then make sure that you know the name of that person who makes the decision about whether or not we're going to to go with this contractor versus that one. We can't. Everybody on the panel thus far has talked about. I've talked about the importance of knowing a person, of those relationships, right? The importance of forming relationships with with someone you're going to do business with. Wouldn't you want to do business with someone who you know rather than someone who you don't know, right? And so I think it's important to make sure that that you get your face in front of these purchasing directors, find out maybe how they think. Maybe it's important to talk to them about, how do you make a decision? Is it that the lowest price, technically acceptable? Is it the all right. It is very important to just find out how they make the decisions about purchasing, and form those relationships. Leave at least with the name of one person. You're on silent, Misty.
Okay. So sorry, we have some time for some final thoughts here, and I know that one thing, building off the broken gear question, is that the power of networking as well. We've actually built our model. Walt Disney runs a very successful event where not only do they have their prime contractors there, but they actually spend a lot of time connecting veteran-owned businesses to other tier 1 contractors. And I think that that's something that's very important, and then to always look at around the room. So the people sitting in the front of the room, those contractors are extremely important people, but making relationships with those around the room are very important. In Broken Gear's case, there's actually a gentleman who's a fellow EBB grad that's had success getting placed into Amazon, Wayfair, Walmart, Hastings, as well as a few other places with the product that he did. So that's someone that we can easily connect you to as well. But any other final thoughts from our panelists?
I think that I would advise that before you think about doing business with the federal government, you have to do that market research to decide if commercial contracting is the best thing for you. But certainly getting to know those who are the small business development centers, the PTAC office, such as where I work, and the SCORE offices and the Small Business Administration, review the learning information that they have there, because all of this is going to help prepare you for whatever it is you decide is the best way to go. And one thing we didn't mention was a business plan. That business plan is a living document, and it'll help you veering off to the left or right into the wrong venues. It grows as your company grows, and certainly when you get to a place where maybe you want to get supplies, goods, or expand your business, and you have to go to a bank or another learning institution, that business plan is going to help you. But the PTAP office does all of these things at no cost, because that's the venue for every day for us to assist businesses in being all that they can possibly be as small businesses. So I would suggest that you keep your finger on that pulse as far as what we have to offer. And I guess that's all I have to say.
I'm on, so I'll say something quick. I asked this last question to a few of my certified clients. They said make sure that you exploit all of the certifications that you're able to have, whether that's MWBE certification, DBE certification 8A. Make sure you exploit all of the certifications that you are eligible for, but also fail forward. It's so important to make sure that you continue to bid and learn from the previous bid that you made, and keep those relationships strong. And I wish you all good luck and success in your businesses.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You know, as I said, it's a tough business, and it's a tough business to get started in. And you might not succeed right away, but it's the companies that grind through and keep bidding and learn from their mistakes that succeed. I will just quickly plug our own site, because we serve. This is you guys are the community that we serve. We are a market intelligence and you know, business development process support platform for companies of 1 up to companies of 1,000. So gufftribe.com. We have a free trial, pain-free free trial to check it out yourself. Also check out our Facebook page. We just did a thing this morning with our partner StreetShares on Facebook Live, where we talked about sort of the news of the day, budget priorities, disaster relief, the border wall, and how it's affecting government contracting. The video is up there now. And if you have any questions, you can always find us just via our support chat on Guff Tribe. Thanks very much.
Can't hear you, Misty.
Thanks, team. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to having everyone in Norfolk next week.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody watching out there. Just to let you know, as a reminder, on September 28th, we're going to have another VetNet session on access to capital. Thank you all, and see you next time.